So when I say it's never been better, I've never had fewer questions about an Oregon team. The great ones, the good ones, the whatever ones. Like, yes, it was great watching Vernon Adams bomb it down the field in 2015. Wasn't a great defense. And so that knowing that Oregon can play a B- game and comfortably beat a decent team, that's new.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, as always, joined by Jim Thornby. And here we are, week 8 is in the books. We are going to take a look back. We got a great guest today. If you love the Oregon Ducks, or if you love food, you're going to love our guest, Dan Rubenstein. He comes on, we go deep into the Oregon Ducks in that
deep
program.
Dish. We go deep dish.
Deep dish, that's right. Yeah, a little tease. If you follow him on Instagram, you know that he loves making pizza, so we have some fun with that. We also talk about Colorado. We talk about the Heisman. We dive into USC, UCLA, and really, do you want your team to win now, or do you believe in a true build? So curious your thoughts on that. And, of course, we have our awards. Before we even get to the Go awards for this week, I want to take you back, Jim, into my weekend that was. Had a game at Rutgers, right? So that's as far away from Los Angeles as you can get. UCLA got their first win as far away from their home as they could get. Their first win, of course, in the Big Ten. Yeah, that's just how it played out. I think from the game standpoint, really just thrilled for Deshaun Foster, Eric Bieniemy, Ethan Garbers and company. It's been a tough road. They've had the most challenging schedule in America, according to at least PFF, if you believe in that, in terms of the teams they have played. Majority of them are ranked extremely high, including Indiana, which I will be at this weekend alongside College Game Day as UW comes to town. But just to put a bow on the weekend, we wrote about it in our newsletter over the weekend. I always try to empty the call sheet on my flight home, and it was really early on a Sunday morning, and it happened to also be the 4-year anniversary of when my mom died, Jim. And I know you know this because you've read the newsletter. But to those that maybe didn't read the newsletter, you can check it out at yoption.com. It was a real meaningful trip for me, and I didn't realize it until right around the game, is that 21 years ago, almost to the day, the Pitt Panthers played at Rutgers in that stadium. I had a catch in that ball game. Why do I remember it? Because I only had like 16, not that I've counted, right? So I remember the catch that I made that day. And after the game, I remember the hug that I got from my mom. And as the game is going on this past Saturday, my dad was there, my sister was there, her family was there. You know, my family was in attendance, just like they were 21 years ago, except one person was missing, of course. And it was my mom. And as we showed a shot of them, and you can see it at Y Options Instagram handle, we have the video now that is really cool of just kind of how we captured that moment. As I'm looking at it on the screen, I end up circling it. It hits me like a ton of bricks, Jim, like, God, I wish there was one more person in that photo. And it being the anniversary, I was like so grateful that the universe and the Big Ten Network would send me to a place where my family can drive to the game, also send me to a place that I have a history at, and also send me to a place on the weekend in which we were going to always celebrate my mom and kind of reunite me with my family that I haven't seen in over a year. So it was probably more emotional than I thought, even when I kind of circled them on the telestrator, Jim, and I was like, damn. And it was just kind of one of those things, like football can bring people together. Football always elicits stories. We try to share them here. And I kind of took a run at it and said, I want to share that story with our audience here at Y Option. And I don't know if it's our most read, but it's one of our most commented on. And I just want to say, like, thank you to the people that read it and that have commented. My phone continues to get messages because so many of us out there have lost a parent. And I think, especially as men, we don't talk about it often, Jim. You're lucky your folks are still around and they're amazing. Like, I miss seeing them at games, especially in Tucson when I'd be there. But it was a real cool way to honor her. And we started this, this endeavor. We wanted to make sure that we did it a way in which we wanted to. And I was just grateful that the audience kind of supported that, and also that this platform exists to be able to do it. So all in all, it was a real cool weekend on the football field, but even way more powerful from a internal familial standpoint.
Yeah, it was pretty much, I mean, even just me trying to explain to my, like, right when, like, we hit send on it to the universe, and I was explaining to my wife, like, what it was about, like, I was getting choked up just, like, telling her about it and stuff like that. So it was a very moving piece. It was definitely the least football piece that we've had in there, but it was definitely very moving.
Yeah. I last note on that, just to anybody who's going through grief, I do think, at least I have found that, like, if you don't talk about it, like, it can easily kind of be forgotten, right? There's like a great Disney movie or Pixar movie kind of about that concept. And, if I'm honest, like 4 years later, like, I've talked less and less and less about her. And I realized, like, that's not the way to do it, because even after the game, like, I was talking to my siblings and my dad, and I was getting choked up and crying at dinner of just like, yeah, like, you just missed like such an influential person. And I always called her coach because she just loved football. Like, she would be lighting up some coaches right now. She would be lighting us up, Jim, based on like either a phrase that we use too often or a graphic that maybe she didn't like. Like, she was just all invested in it.
It'd be warranted too. Warranted.
Yeah, it'd be warranted. So I just say that if you have a parent like Jim does, both of them, love on them, call them, because they want to talk to you. And if you've lost one, know that there's a community out there with us that can understand and relate to that. So that was my weekend, Jim. I know you had a busy weekend as well, but I want to get to our awards before we really truly reflect. And we know how we do these. These are our Go Awards presented by our founding partner, 76. And we know this sport, right? You got the thrill, these peaks of victory, like Ethan Garber's running a 49-yard touchdown, to like these brutal defeats. Sorry, SC fans. We know how challenging it could be. But we see it on the field, we see it on the sideline, and we know that college football is driven by people that are driven by internal drivers, but ultimately they're go-getters. And that's why we name this our Go Award. They pump passion into every play, every day. We want to celebrate those players, those plays, those coaches who just go above and beyond and just keep going. They work through it, whether it is grief, like I had to navigate over the weekend, or through a defense, or through a creative offense. We found a couple talented, gifted players and coaches that were nominated. Jim, where do we net out as we gift out this week's Go Awards presented by our founding partner, 76?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Ethan Garbers, and he is our 5-star QB of the week. He was responsible for all 5 of those touchdowns in UCLA's first ever Big Ten win. And of course, as we said, it had to have been on the East Coast just because of the absurdity of this college football season. But yeah, all 5 touchdowns, 4 passing touchdowns, that 49-yard touchdown run. So Ethan takes home that award. Go Gone, for the first time this year, we went with a quarterback in that spot. And John Mateer has been about as explosive as a quarterback as there in the country this year. He had 3 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. He's only one of 10 times that a quarterback has done it this year. Jalen Milroe has actually done it a couple times, so credit to him. But Mateer, in this last game against Hawaii, had 2 runs of 10 yards, 3 passes of over 30 yards. He's among the nation's leaders in quarterbacks in both of those stats for the entire season. That dude is Mateo Uyunglele, sacked for the 3rd straight week, the 2nd straight week that Oregon has been without Jordan Birch. Leading the defense. They got their first road shutout since 1992. We're going to talk a lot more about Oregon with our guests coming up here in a little bit. And then the headset hero, Deion Sanders. I mean, I know both of us have been critical of Colorado the last year and a half, but the results are showing. I mean, they're playing to the level of people expecting them to. And then we'll talk more about this later, but they're 5-2 overall now, 3 straight road wins for them. That's the first time they've done that since 1996. The defense was on fire against Arizona. And again, we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but Coach Prime, it's happening, and it's happening because of the defense.
Yeah, well said. Congratulations to all of them. Of course, we're always tracking those things on our social media, or go to yoption.com. You can also go there to get that hat like Jim is rocking. We got a merch store, which has been pretty fun. Been seeing a couple more orders come through. We appreciate all of your support, because with your support, we get to do things like this, which is talk about now the number 1 team in the land. The Oregon Ducks, I'm calling them the most improved team from the start of the season, like actual season, not hype season, to where we sit now after 8 weeks. They have ranked Illinois coming in this weekend. You referenced Mateo Uyunglele, top team in the nation. I think they're the only former Pac-12 team even ranked right now
Correct.
in the nation.
Yeah,
Okay,
Washington State is just they would be the quote unquote 26th team because they are the highest of the others receiving votes. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I was just thinking about like last September we had a week where it was 8 Pac-12 teams ranked, and so this whole realignment thing has really wreaked havoc with some of these schools, and I think we've had 2 straight weeks where it's been like Heartbreak City of, teams losing these close games at the end. But, for Oregon, it was a week where, again, we don't like the term trap game, but like it was one of those things where like everyone was like, oh, this is the one to watch out for because it's Friday night. And they put that to bed quick. I mean, they were great on offense. They were great on defense. And now it's like, okay, now you look at the rest of this schedule. I mean, they've got a tough game this week with Illinois, but that's the last remaining currently top 25 opponent on their schedule. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, not that they don't have other tough games, right? Because you look at it like, who is it? So they still have to go at Michigan. They still have to go at Wisconsin. Obviously, neither of those are currently in the top 25. Michigan is down right now. Wisconsin has actually been playing a lot better since that SC game. And then they have home games against Maryland, who we just saw what happened with them against USC this weekend, and obviously the rivalry game with Washington. So it'll be interesting to see, like, can Oregon get through the regular? They're good enough, but in this day and age, it's so hard to do it. Can they get through the regular season without a blemish?
Yeah, I'm excited to watch this team, man. I think we're going to start playing a game, I think when we get into November, called like, what do we trust the most? And right now, we'll talk about Dan Rubenstein, our guest coming up shortly, about the Oregon Ducks. I think it's easy to say, like, among the top teams in the country, I think it's easy to agree that you trust the Ducks the most just because you've seen consistent improvement. I really believe it. And where have they been consistent? At the line of scrimmage. And I would not be nervous if they went and had to play Texas, against Georgia, against Bama, against Tennessee. I'm not saying they're going to win those games, but you're not saying, I don't know if they can hang. Like, we all remember, was it 2014, Ohio State, Oregon, the national championship game? And the Ducks just couldn't hang up front. Yeah. Like they just struggled there. I don't think that
or even the last time that Oregon played Georgia. I mean, that was Lanning's first game. I mean, that was a boat race.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because, we kind of talked about it a little bit last week. Like, if they won and Georgia beat Texas, would Ohio State, would Oregon get that number 1 ranking? And not that it really matters. It's more just like a feather in the cap than anything that constitute anything that's real. But it's funny that John Wilner is one of the 2 voters that still put Georgia as the number 1 team in the country. Because I think basically because the totality of their resume. Obviously, they look great against Texas on Saturday, but we'll see. Like once the CFP comes here, like at the end of this month, then we can start really talking about the rankings. And again, it doesn't matter until December, like because there'll be some jockeying, obviously, but if you win your games, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think the jockeying will be fun. But again, just to remind the world, as Jim has reminded me many times, if you are a conference champion, the 5 highest ranked conference champions, they get the automatic berth, period, end of story. And then we'll see where the seeding goes. And then, of course, the losers of those conference games, the conference championship games, what happens with them, something to track. Another thing to track, I didn't think we'd be tracking Colorado. I thought we'd be tracking Arizona. I think you and I were high on Arizona. You, as an alum, you are our Arizona expert. You went on Justin Spears and that radio show last week. Check that one out. Jim is crushing it as always, talking about college football and also promoting Y Option, which we appreciate, man. I thought Arizona would be the more talented team Saturday night. It was homecoming. Obama was in town, as was Coach Prime and Travis Hunter. And
Obama picked the Wildcats.
As he should.
At his rally on Friday, which it was funny because after the game, they asked Deion about that. He kind of laughed. He's like, "Oh, I get it. Like you come, when you're in town, you got to be political and you got to make the right political choice." He goes, "But we said we only had 2 good players." He's kind of joking, making reference to Shedeur and Travis. But I think, to that point, like Deion quieted a lot of people this weekend because, everybody knew when you have Shador and you have Travis and you have some of those other receivers and skill players that they've had, putting up points was never going to be a problem for that team this year. But the defense has markedly improved. I mean, granted, you could put some of that on the fact that Arizona's offense right now is kind of lost, but they forced 3 turnovers. They had 7 sacks. Arizona only had, I think, 6 sacks the whole season coming up to this point, and Colorado put 7 on them this week. So I think it's a mixture of the two, of Arizona struggles and Colorado success. But I'd be lying if I told you right now that Colorado would be 5-2 and 3-1 in the Big 12. Especially like when I watched that Baylor game, they were so fortunate to win that game. Like at the end of that game, like I think Shador got sacked, on that last drive without wound up having the Hail Mary. It was like 5 out of 6 snaps he was sacked on. And then like they had the back-to-back Hail Marys, the one that the guy dropped, and then they got another one, and that went in, and then went overtime. And they won, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not really buying on Colorado. But then the next week it was UCF on the road, and they looked really good that week. I was like, oh, okay. And then the thing that sold me on them, even though it was a game that they lost, was the game against Kansas State. Because I think Kansas State is a really good football team. And I'm not just saying that because they put it on Arizona earlier in the year. I mean, they've been one that, other than the BYU game, Kansas State has looked really good this season. Yeah, and I think that was the kind of thing where I was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, they're a better team than I thought.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
You're right. And you look at their schedule. Cincy, Utah, OK State at home. And that place is going to be bonkers. They go on the road to Texas Tech, who just got drilled, and Kansas, who has been down. They don't face BYU or Iowa State. Like, there's a world where they're playing in the playoff, or excuse me, they're playing in the champ game. And if they lose the champ game, I'd be so curious to see if they get one of those at-large bids, right? Like, you start comping now. The Texas Tech game is going to be a big one, right? Yeah. If you get a one-loss Wazoo and a Big 12 championship game loser in Colorado, there's a common opponent.
And that's 3 losses right there. Yeah, that would be Colorado's 3rd loss, assuming they win the other games. Yeah. That would put, Colorado 3 losses. It would be interesting. I'm not sure how, like, I saw a couple tweets this morning, even just of like the Big 12 not getting enough respect. And like they were fortunate this weekend with BYU and Iowa State both pulling those games out.
Were they out?
I mean, Big 12 was at like almost like total chaos. If those games, would have went the other way. Oklahoma State, had that amazing drive against BYU. That was the Friday night game. And it was just like, oh, wow, like Oklahoma State is finally going to get over the hump. But then BYU really just marched that down the field and boom. And then with Iowa State, the same thing. Like they were struggling with UCF and they were able to, Rocco Becht was able to pull that game out. And so like those two wins might be the difference in the Big 12 getting one team in the playoff or 2 teams in the playoff. Because if they can get those 2 teams to the end and playing each other where there's, maybe you can sneak in that second team, which is going to be tough.
Yeah, we'll get into it in the playoff, but I have a feeling like this year more than ever, how you play late is going to be such a big deal because you're going to be comping. Let's just say it's a epic Big 12 title game, like TCU Baylor-esque from a couple years ago, and Wazoo's not playing in a champ game. If you're just going to comp those two from the lens of the West Coast, and Colorado loses, the way the committee, I think they're going to start saying, all right, if this team played this team, if this team played this team, versus like there's the whole argument of body of work or who's playing the best right now. And I think this year, once we get into like, call it 8, 9, 10, 11, let's just say 12 is your 5th conference champion automatic berth. I think that's going to be like as healthy of debating as we've ever seen in the sport. We will do that here. I want to stay in the Big 12 because sadly, we're also in coach firing season, right? First head coaches got dismissed. Now we're seeing offensive coordinators, Seth Luttrell at Oklahoma. gets dismissed in his first season. His first season.
Is that his
I believe?
I'm not sure on that one. I'll have to look that back up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is, because I think their OC is now the head coach at Mississippi State. But confirm that or deny that before we get out of here. But also at Utah, Andy Ludwig, who has been an absolute stud for Utah multiple times, right? One time in the early 2000s, leads them to the Sugar Bowl. We all know what happened there. Utah fans, you know how you put it on Alabama. And then you go to the second tenure when he was there, was extremely impressive. Again, he came in, 2019, I think? Came back and did a heck of a job. Obviously, record-setting offense a couple years ago when they were finally healthy. But they have struggled with Cam Rising being banged up. In comes their senior analyst, Mike Bajakian, who has been a play caller. He's been around the game a bunch, Northwestern, Boston College, Tennessee, and others. He's experienced, not worried about that. But to me, it came as a huge shock when I saw that Andy Ludwig was going to step down. Why? One, it's not as though he's a first-time coordinator and they're finding struggles. He has worked through things before. Two, how many times has Kyle Whittingham talked about the relationship with Andy Ludwig and how much he trusts? It's like he finally found his guy. Stat for you, when Andy left the first time, I think 8 of the next 10 years, they had different offensive coordinators, right? And now they've been with Andy for the last, 7 or whatever it's been, 5, 6, 7.
5 years, yeah.
Cool. So he came in when Cam Rising was there. They kind of came in together. And now we know with Cam's injury, he's going to miss the entirety of this season. And now Andy Ludwig is gone for the rest of this season. I would have never have bet this would have happened. Ever. At Utah. But it has. Jim, I want to hear your thoughts, and then I'm going to give mine.
Yeah, well, first I'll say that yes, you were correct. Luttrell, that was his first year as the offensive. This was his first year as the offensive coordinator. He had been hired the year before as an analyst. So yeah, very short leash there for Oklahoma. But with Utah, I mean, I think what you're looking at, and you see the fan base, which you look at anybody's fan base on Twitter these days, it's pitchforks and torches, and but on Saturday, they had 267 total yards. 71 of those yards came on one play to Money Parks. Yeah. They were 2 of 15 on third down. So I get the frustration. And a lot of what I've seen been written was this is an offense designed for Cam Rising to succeed, but maybe it's not the right offense for Isaac Wilson, and that there needs to be an adjustment. And we've seen some good early in the season with Isaac Wilson, and then they had their chances at the end of this last game, but then he had to just kind of throw it up in the air twice on fourth down at the end, where they were having a chance to try and come back in that game. So I get it, because they're struggling, but there's also part of me that and I'm not saying this as an in the know with this, but if I'm someone who's had the success that Andy Ludwig's had, and it's you're maybe it's somewhere where you might have already been thinking about this would be maybe my last year, maybe you're you know what, maybe it's just best that I do step away and let someone else kind of take the reins here, because it's just not working out.
Yeah. Well, look, we're not in there, right? We don't know that. When you talk to anybody around the program, like we both have in recent days, they all lead with the same thing, as everybody loves Andy Ludwig. He's a legend in coaching. Remember, this is a guy who was on his way to Notre Dame a couple years ago, didn't take the job. I mean, he's well sought after. I'll be curious to see if he is retired from coaching in college. We know it's a different game right now. We're seeing that in college football. Of course, we've seen that in other sports. Tony Bennett, as the head coach of UVA, stepping down late last week. Point being, I was caught off guard, I think, from seeing it. I think it'd be fair to assume that the offense would struggle with a freshman quarterback. I think it'd be fair to assume the offense would be up and down when you don't know who's going to play at quarterback given week to week. I'd imagine, knowing Andy Ludwig enough, he probably went in and said, look, we're not getting it done offensively. I'll do whatever it takes. I think it's maybe time for a different voice. That's just what I have to surmise when I'm kind of piecing it together. And I hate to see that, because I think it's really easy to light up coaches when their side of the ball isn't performing. It's not as though Utah doesn't do good stuff offensively. And I think there are times when programs and staffs and coaches know, like, hey, maybe it is a need for a spark. There is a need for another voice. There is a need. But I also know this is a reality, is that nobody's installing a brand new offense heading into week 9,
Right.
let alone in week 4, right? Let alone in week 3 of training camp. Like you just are what you are. So now what I'll be most curious about is like, what is the style of play calling, right? We've seen this enough to know that here comes something new, whether it's tempo, whether it's more open sets, whatever it is, like there's going to be something for Isaac Wilson. And I think the goal for Kyle Whittingham to move forward is he needs his team to have a spark and play in the style in which they are capable of, because they have a roster I still think that is capable of making a lot of noise down the stretch here. We'll see. They got to go to Colorado. Do they go get that win? I wouldn't be shocked if they did. Like they're going to get somebody.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're seeing here, and it's really in my eyes unfortunate, is this is becoming the NFL light. I mean, it's like, it's a performance. The level of expectation is higher. And I had this conversation with a friend last week. It's like, now that schools are asking their fans to contribute to collectives, hey, give up your money to be part of this. Like, it's putting more ownership in the fans.
It's fair.
And so it's like, all of a sudden it's like, if you're asking me for this money, I want to see the results of this. Yeah. And I think we're seeing shorter and shorter leashes everywhere, not just for the coaches, but for the players as well. And, you had this conversation a few weeks ago about how like a player getting benched or whatever like that. And it's not as easy as just like, oh, he's not playing well, because you have all these now financial deals that you have to somehow integrate into your decision-making when you're doing this. So I think unfortunately, like this is more of what we're going to see a lot more of, is that NFL light mentality of, hey, these coaches are making a ton of money. The players are now getting money. Like the people are going to be a lot more critical based on that.
Okay, so let's just finish up on this with Utah. I went on Spence Checkett's show, big fan of him and his line of questioning. It's always really thoughtful. And he asked me, I think probably a hot topic item in Salt Lake City, which is, should Cam Rising come back, right? He's done for the season. He's eligible for another year. Clearly, he's been getting paid a lot in NIL over the last couple seasons when NIL has become a thing. And do the fans want to turn it over to the young freshman or somebody else in the transfer portal, or do you want to bring the guy back? I want to just put this out there, and I think it's important for Utah fans to hear this thought. I get that you are frustrated. I get that you want change. You've got it as an offensive coordinator. That's going to happen. And I get that you want consistency at the QB position because it's probably been hard to be a fan. Probably been harder to be Cam Rising. Nobody wants to play more than him. Okay, so here's my question for you, and just kind of a theory to put out there. There's been a lot of schools that have moved on from their quarterbacks. Let's look at Oklahoma. They just fired their offensive coordinator. If Dylan Gabriel was still there, do you think they move on? Just being honest with you, probably not, right? They moved on because they recruited really well. They had they back-to-back Elite 11 quarterbacks come through there. That was the plan. They moved on. Different circumstance, different situations. But you think in week 8, they would have loved Dylan Gabriel right now, who to me would get one of my 3 Heisman votes, 1,000% if I had to vote today? Probably. How about Tyler Shuck? Almost took down Miami and his old coach in Mario Cristobal over the weekend. Texas Tech decided to move on. Think they would like Tyler Shuck on their roster? Look, I know the quarterbacks at Texas Tech. A bunch of Elite 11 kids are awesome young men. But I'm just saying, like, do you want to move on that badly? Because for Utah fans, if I ask you, you have a healthy Cam Rising next year, and in week 8, you're sitting at 8-0 or 7-1 next season. Do you care that he made money in NIL again? Because he should. It's part of the craft. It's part of just reality today in college football, right? If you got injured on your job, would you take your severance? Would you take your whatever it is? Would you get paid while maybe you couldn't go to your job that day? Of course you would, yeah. Right? If you got hurt on the job. So I just want, and we pride ourselves on being thoughtful and not argumentative. I just want to be thoughtful around this because I've been asked about it a bunch. Should Cam and Utah just move on? My advice is everybody just hit pause. hit pause. There's no rush. You don't even know who your offensive coordinator is going to be next year. You don't know what style in which your staff wants to run. Heck, we don't even know if Kyle Whittingham is 100%.
I was just going to say the same thing. It's just like, you know that day is coming. But we don't know when it is, but it's not that far in the future.
And we also know that Cam Rising in the current market is going to make, at least in my opinion, going to make more money next year in college than he would in the NFL. I don't know the significance of his injury, but I don't know if he's going to be able to run in a pro day or go to the combine and throw in late February as we sit here in late October. I don't know that answer, but he's probably not going to be at his best even if he is, right? So we're all over like the mental health side of this thing, and also not ignorant to the fact that he's really talented in Cam Rising. He just is. When he was healthy, he was balling. Go watch the beginning of the season. Hand injury, foot injury, and now we have what is seemingly the same story a couple years in a row. And I get it, man. But Utah fans, put yourself in week 8 of next year, week 9 of next year. And if you've got this absolute veteran stud leading your team, are you going to be happy? Even if he makes 6-7 figures? You want to win. So it's going to be a decision that a lot of people have to make. I don't want to see fans make it for anybody. So in short, kick back on social media. Don't light this kid up. Like, let him just work through his process. Anyway, keep it moving. We got to get to an interview with Dan Rubenstein real quick, Jim. USC is struggling. They can't close out games. Dan and I get into it. Cal, oh my gosh. 4 straight losses by 9. You think you got it tough at SC? Try being a Golden Bear. Like, and I don't know what their record is over the last couple of years in one-score games. I think they have 1 win out of like 19 or 20 games.
I think it might have been 2 wins.
2 wins
since 2021. I think it was. It was a crazy stat. But yeah, they now have 4 straight losses by 9 points, and this time it was like they had it. And I won't go too long on this, but like they had it down. They had their kicker who had already made 3 field goals in the game. They had him set up for a 27-yarder, and he missed it with about 90 seconds left in that game. It's just heartbreaking. They've been outscored 42-9 in the fourth quarter during this 4-game losing streak. Wow. USC. They've lost 4 of the last 5 in the fourth quarter and overtime of those 4 games, outscored 49-21. Wow. I mean, that's just gut wrenching. And it's, what would you rather be? Would you rather be a team that is getting blown out and irrelevant, or a team that is like, you're right there on the doorstep, where it's like, you just need that one, you need that one play or another one here to just kind of like, I'd rather be the team on the doorstep, even as heartbreaking as it is every week. That there's something there, and that if they can maybe just find that little recipe to kind of stir it up a little bit.
Amen. So my last thought before we get to Dan Rubenstein, emotional fatigue is a real thing in college football. I believe last year in the national championship game, Michigan fans are not going to like this, but when you look at UW and the 1-score games, I think they had 8 straight 1-score games in advance to playing the Natty. When I talked to coaches literally moments after that game, sidebar conversations, they said our guys for some reason just seemed emotionally spent before the game even started. I look at these 2 teams in the state of California, so many tight games. The coaches right now, they've got to navigate that. It's the emotional fatigue of these tight games, and then getting up early, getting going, and then dealing with the ebbs and flows. You got a Friday night game for USC at Rutgers. We'll get into it later in the week. Jim, I'm not really sure who Cal plays. I don't know if you have it in front of you.
Oregon State.
Okay, yeah, that's right. They play Oregon State. So you got to get up for it, right? The emotional fatigue is real. Oregon State, they got to deal with it. They had a tough loss. Washington State keeps it rolling. John Mateer, of course, he wins another award at the Y Option Go, Go, Go Awards. They go to San Diego State this week. We'll talk about that as well later this week. But for now, let's get to our special guest. You know him as Dan Rubenstein. He is one of the founders and co-hosts of The Solid Verbal, one of the original OG podcasts in college football. He's a West Coast dude. He speaks our language here. He went to Oregon. He's a diehard Duck, but he's dialed in on college football, also dialed in on all things food, specifically pizza. He currently resides in Chicago. He's kicking out content all weekend long, does one of the best recaps every Saturday night. So check out his content. And for now, check out our conversation presented by our founding partner, 76. It is fueled by them, keeping you in the know as you are on the go, go, go. So whether you're on a plane, you go for a jog, a Peloton, or just kicking back, you want to listen to some good old conversation, listen to this man, Dan Rubenstein. Well, his team is number one in America, but Dan Rubenstein's always number one in our hearts. Also the number one download for us on the weekends on a Saturday night.
Wow.
Check out the Solid Verbal. Dan, it's good to have you back. You've been on this podcast in a few different iterations. You are, and you were, the first podcast I ever listened to. Your show, the Solid Verbal. Yep, I remember that being like, this is cool. I've known Dan for a long time. I remember kicking it with the Piesman, one of your old crafts back in the day in New York City. We go way, way back. Thank you for taking some time in an extremely busy schedule to hang out with us today, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Look, when you're both 28 years old, like you and I both are, we both started in this business when we were 10. I remember watching Yogi run around Elite 11 fields. This is not a new thing for Yogi. He's kind of the godfather of behind-the-scenes quarterback stuff. And were you broadcasting for like Fox College Sports?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh
yeah, it was Steve Fiziak,
legend,
and Sam Ponder, formerly Samantha Steele,
Yes.
and I. We were a crew back in 2009 doing a bunch of what was then, I think, only a 8 or 10 team Big 12 league. Pretty much most of those games. And Pac-10 games, I remember calling. Jim Harbaugh, Stanford against Steve Sarkisian, Washington.
A lot of Nick Holt action in Yogi Roth's life.
Yeah. Love Nick Holt. Nick Holt, by the way, you'll love Nick Holt for many reasons. One being he's currently coaching in Italy, and we will get to it later. But if you don't know Dan Rubenstein's other passion, it is food. And not only am I finding out you're giving like Guy Haberman food recommendations,
of course,
on our road trips, which I love, but you also thrive at making pizza. You showcase that sometimes in your social media. So everybody go check out Dan Rubenstein on the social for not only college football, but also inspo on the pizza ship, man. Yeah, we'll get to that at the end. I want to play a little fun game before we get you out of here around pizza and college football. But let's just start where your heart is, right? I left my heart in Oregon, right? Like, here we go. The Ducks, number one. I know you guys talked about it over the weekend on your show, but here's what it's like to be you right now. You have tracked this program since you went to college there. You're very close to it. Now they sit number one in a poll that doesn't really matter, but still, it's the only one that really gets talked about right now. How do you feel about the Oregon Ducks?
Never been better. And I don't know if that's even fully true, but I like saying it. It sounds good. It's a unique situation, right? Oregon has had incredible runs, incredible coaches, incredible offenses, incredible defensive players. You look at some of the big names up front in like the early 2010s with DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead and the Marcus Mariota offenses, and even like Darren Thomas, Jeremiah Masoli. There's a lot of great players who have played. The product has never felt more complete than how it feels right now. When you look at a disruptive defensive line, when you look at a ball hawking secondary, when you look at having kind of an average performance and winning it 35-0 on the road in a letdown spot, that's kind of new as an Oregon human. And seeing an accurate quarterback, not terribly new because of what Bo Nix was able to do. That was, I think, statistically the best Oregon offense ever last year under Bo Nix and Will Stein. But that after a couple of rocky weeks early, that Dylan Gabriel is bombing it down the field against everybody, that Jordan James has been good, that there are a lot of teams who start out the season and they have kind of an uneven or a suspect offensive line, right? And that's tough to figure out mid-year. Oregon got a little healthier. They shifted around a couple of guys, and there hasn't been a single conversation about the offensive line since that Boise State game. That's new. So when I say it's never been better, I've never had fewer questions about an Oregon team. The great ones, the good ones, the whatever ones. Like, yes, it was great watching Vernon Adams bomb it down the field in 2015. Wasn't a great defense. And so that knowing that Oregon can play a B- game and comfortably beat a decent team, that's new.
I love that. Okay, so I believe that Oregon is the most improved team that I've seen this season.
Okay.
Called their opener against Idaho. You referenced the Boise State game against a team that's going to be in the conversation for a CFP berth. We know that. And, of course, a Heisman candidate in Boise State's running back, Ashton Ginty. But where do you net out on that? Because when I watch them, I think every week I'm like, growth. To your point this past weekend, no number one team this season has done what they did in terms of once you're ranked. I get the schedules are different, but they looked the part, right? They didn't play down. They didn't have a letdown as a short week. and I just thought it was dominant,
Yeah.
defensive front. We'll get into all the elements of it, but do you agree with that overall sentiment?
Yeah, there's an element to college football teams and great college football teams that you take care of business. And we say, like, win your clunkers on the solid verbal. And I think that's super important. Everybody's going to have a very down week. It's better to win 35-33 than to lose 35-33. But there is something about Oregon over the course of this season that they're incrementally taking care of business more often, whether it was a game against UCLA, whether it was being somewhat close against Oregon State, then running away with that 49-14. You want to feel good when you're watching a top 5 team, top 10 team, that they can take care of business. You watch a team like Iowa State, who's in the top 10 right now. They're not taking care of business. They're winning games. And, the sort of phrase winning is a skill came from what Kalen DeBoer was able to do at Washington last season. And they're finding ways to pull out games late. But what Oregon's been able to do in terms of getting off the field on third down on defense, that they're just stacking little things. And that's how you improve over the course of a season, that you're not dropping dumb balls as an offense. You're not whiffing on protection calls as an experienced quarterback anymore, that you are deciding on third down that this is fourth down territory. So we're going to have a 2-play package in, and it's the right thing to do. And so, yes, Oregon is stacking little things in a way that they weren't doing in those first couple games, which is a little bit excusable. It's a new quarterback. It's a new offensive line. The tackles were back, but shuffling around things, they figured it out. And that is with how many new players everybody seems to have, including Oregon. Like, you can look at Oregon starters on both sides of the ball. And I did this, and it's dotted with South Carolina and Washington and Duke and Rhode Island. There's just a lot new that wasn't there a couple of years ago. Oregon is stacking little things, and I think that's why they've improved like they have.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The number that jumped out to me in advance of the season was that I counted 10 second-year players at the edge on the defensive front. We've talked about this offline before.
Yeah.
And coming off this weekend, we give out awards every week. Like, you guys do an element of that too on your show. Mm-hmm. We gave out that dude award. The guy just showed up, and it was Mateo Uyunglele on the defensive front. It was like 3 weeks ago, we all talked about Jordan Burch as being the guy that everybody thought he would be coming out of high school, or when he arrived in Eugene in his second school, to your point of transferring from South Carolina. But that group hasn't missed a beat since his injury, whether it's Tatum Tuioti, Mateo, who we referenced. I just think that's what I trust the most. And I think if you can do that, you can find consistent performance. So my question for you is, like, among the teams right now, whether you want to look at the AP top 10 or the solid verbal top 10 or your top 10 or top 5, and you can kind of project the playoff. Mm-hmm. And you need to have consistent performance against really good teams for at least 3 weeks, maybe 4. It feels like this team is the one I trust the most. Where do you net out as we enter week 9 around the team you trust the most that's in contention to find a spot in this new 12-team playoff?
I think it's Oregon. I think it's Oregon in this moment. There are a couple of things I don't fully trust quite yet, and I don't think Dylan Gabriel can change the fact that he's 5'10". I don't think. We'll see what happens technologically in November, but that's something that you see some of the defensive linemen. You saw what Georgia was able to do in mixing up the way that they attacked Quinn Ewers in the Texas offensive line, that I'm not fully there that Dylan Gabriel is a finished product at, again, 5'10", that with long arms and big bodies and simulated pressures, that he's a finished product in that regard. But when you look at the flaws of a team like Ohio State, which I think defensively, they didn't touch Oregon. And so that, to me, even with a schedule that's pretty good, Penn State is a we'll see right now in that top 4 or 5 range. I know they're number 3, I think, right now. But Oregon seems to be in a place that they can survive losing their best defensive lineman in Jordan Burch. You mentioned how Mateo Uyunglele stepped up and the edge guys stepped up, and the defensive line is deep and they're rotating in young guys in an impressive way. That I don't know that Oregon has separated themselves, even though they're number 1, but everybody's flawed. Oregon has enough right now that for the first time in my career as an Oregon fan, that I feel pretty decently about how they stack up against a Georgia team who has struggled at times finding go-to guys on offense, without Ladd McConkey, without Brock Bowers from California, by the way. That there is something nice about Oregon having potentially the fewest questions. And so I would still put Georgia there. I would still put Texas there. I give Sark a lot of credit and a lot of benefit of the doubt in terms of figuring out how they can improve, because that's something we talked about on the show, that Georgia almost had that opportunity, given their game against Kentucky, given their game against Alabama, to self-scout in a way that Texas couldn't, given their schedule, with the down Michigan and then Colorado State, UTSA, and just not Mississippi State, a number of teams that are just not meeting that bar, that Georgia had that opportunity to say, okay, here's how we can improve, and these are things we can change, whereas Texas didn't. They will now, especially given the rest of their schedule. But yeah, in terms of those teams in that top 5, I still think it's Ohio State. I still think it's Texas. I still think it's Georgia. And Miami's that wild card to me. They're winning a bunch of weird, close games, but Cam Ward is looking sharp. Their offense looks sharp. I just don't think they have the defense and the discipline on defense to beat anyone in the country right now.
One of the things that has, I think, continually stood out to us here at Y Option is in realignment, the scheduling variance is so drastic, and not like 8 versus 9 conference games. Like, that's ridiculous. And hopefully that gets annulled at some point and just have some sort of equity in that regard across the sport. Right. But in terms of your point, like, you look at like SC and UCLA schedule, gnarly. Indiana, I'm going there this weekend. I'm so stoked on Coach Signetti and Tino Sinceri and Mike Shanahan, like the Pittsburgh contingency, man. Hail to Pitt all day long on this show.
Yeah.
But it's just been a different run. Same thing for Texas and Georgia. Like, how do you net out trying to make sense of college football in a world where there's better games every week, and you could argue with realignment, but everybody isn't playing in the same cadence of schedule in terms of teams missed big type of games. I mean, I think Michigan has only had 2 away games, I think, all season long.
Sounds right. Yep.
You know, like it's just kind of crazy in that regard, sitting here at the end of October. But I'm curious how you net out of evaluating teams, knowing that the scheduling has less equality than it's probably ever had.
Yeah, and it's impossible to gauge in the offseason too, because you couldn't say that like, hey, good for Oregon, they miss Indiana, right? That like You could say Oregon's schedule seemed pretty tough in the back half. Look at, maybe an improved Wisconsin and having Michigan and having Jed Fish in Washington. Well, having Michigan, it doesn't seem so bad right now. We don't really fully know what Wisconsin is, but yeah, good for
Illinois
a lot of these teams.
Good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But good for a lot of these teams missing Indiana, right? That like you can become fortunate in an unexpected way, and your schedule can become unfortunate in a number of ways. And you mentioned USC, and man, if USC can't beat Rutgers this week, that's a different conversation to have. But yes, you're a West Coast team, and you sign up to play in the Big Ten, and you sign up knowing that Maryland and Rutgers and Penn State and all these teams are in the conference. You're signing up for, even if your schedule looks okay, you're looking at a lot of weird flights. You're looking at a lot of bouncing back and forth. You look at Stanford in the ACC, bouncing back and forth between Syracuse and coming home and then bopping over to Clemson and figuring out if the Clemson equipment manager can do your laundry. I don't know if you saw that story. Pretty incredible. Stanford and Clemson had a conversation about they didn't know if they could bring all of the equipment back in a truck and have it drive back to Clemson. And the equipment managers had a conversation about laundry, and if Clemson could cover Stanford's laundry. So
did they cover it?
No, they turned out Stanford could do their own laundry. Okay. They figured it out. But Clemson, to their credit, was like, yeah, we got you, dude. We're totally good. Cool. Tell us what you need.
That's good. Locking arms with your new conference friend. So let me follow up on that.
Yeah, please.
Because I always felt like, I work for the Big Ten Network now, as you know. So I'm calling these games. I was just at Rutgers. SC, to your point, just lost at Maryland. I always felt like those games, let's just take the Trojans, going to Maryland, you can comp it to going to Cal, right? Or going to Minnesota, to me, was comped it going to Oregon State. But to your point, much longer of a flight and no history of opponent. Like, you kind of just circled at least the Minnesota one, which we called of like, that's got upset written all over it. Mm-hmm. If you want to call it that at the time. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be if you looked at the records of these two teams.
Yeah.
But I wonder where you net out on USC. You're from LA. I live in LA. What is it? 14 points separate them from being undefeated. Like, it's a handful of plays in the tightest of margins. LA, as you know, and this SC community is going crazy. All the alums are tweeting up a storm, blah, blah, blah. We've seen this happen before. Where do you net out, living in the middle of the country, having West Coast roots, and covering the nation on the Trojans?
I think it's a pretty significant disappointment, and it's something that I think, looking at USC the past couple years, I always felt Lincoln Riley could find a quarterback. I always felt Lincoln Riley could find, a safety here and there, a corner here and there, obviously very active in the portal. I thought the group of receivers heading into this season, Deuce Robinson, Jacoby Lane, Zachariah Branch, like different sizes, different abilities, different strengths. Like I thought that was going to be one of the better units in the Big Ten, no matter the team. But you look at how Lincoln Riley's recruited. It kind of doesn't matter the speed you recruit if you don't have an offensive line and you don't have a defensive line in terms of recruiting out of high school. I think you can fill in playmakers on defense. I don't think there's any substitute for not building an offensive line internally. And it's a very specific recruiting strategy. But when you look at the teams, either on the West Coast or anybody who's improved or anybody who has a big brand name like USC does, it doesn't matter how you recruit if you're not recruiting lines. And we saw Michigan take advantage of USC up front a ton. We saw Penn State take advantage. Over the course of a game, if you don't have 9 or 10 quality defensive linemen to get after the quarterback, if you don't have a solid offensive line with maybe a swing guy to come in there when you're feeling a little bit thin, Miller Moss has been running for his life. And I understand that there aren't linemen on the West Coast in the way that there were when Pete Carroll was coaching in the 2000s. But I don't know, from day one, you look at how Dan Lanning has recruited, and it's not fully fair to compare USC to Oregon, even though they're on the same coast. There are a lot of teams that are not necessarily close to where linemen are growing up, but that he was unable to build from the inside out from day one. And I know there's stories coming about, not being at Mater Dei or Bosco in Southern California. I don't know. I think he's let down that school in terms of that specific area, because you look at the end of the Michigan game, you look at the end of the Maryland game. I don't know. You got to rotate in big bodies, and those guys are tired at the end of those games. And I hope it's fixable for USC, because I think USC would be a net positive if they're a quality team in this conference. But until they're able to start stacking lineman classes, I don't see it improving a ton.
Okay, so let's have this conversation, because I think this is really cool. Because I think there's one hand where you can be a distinguished alum and light up SC. You could be a fan, and of course, like my text threads, you can imagine what they are with SC alums. Mm-hmm. There's the other hand of like, let's have a contextual conversation. So let's just go year one context. Comes in, takes over a team that we all would agree was down. Yeah. Right? Check. Okay. They get the greatest player, at least quarterback I've ever seen in Caleb Williams. They have an offensive line that came out of high school that was really connected and proved to be extremely positive. Mm-hmm. Right? And they have a schedule that helps them out, and they win a bunch of close games. Yeah. Right. They have the schedule that doesn't have Oregon, doesn't have Washington, and they're on the doorstep of a CFP and a Pac-12 championship game. With a healthy Caleb, they probably win that game against Utah from being there. Right. Cool. That's year one. Cool. And now the bar is high. The Trojans are back. I think to your point, there's a world where it's like, okay, do we know our reality in the building of, hey, we got a little bit lucky here. We overachieved. Let's go build the foundation here. Or do you say, hey, we got the best player in the world. Let's go get the best available players to replace this offensive line. That's what they did. It didn't work. Right. And now I look at this team and the offensive line that you referenced and the guys that struggle up front. I think they brought in 6 linemen that are now in their second year in the program. Some are starting as redshirt freshmen. Some are backups as redshirt freshmen. But there is like a young nucleus there. They signed a bunch again last year on the offensive defensive fronts. Like the foundation, I think, is young, but I think it's pretty strong. Fans could care less about that now, but I wonder if a year from now, with Elijah Page and company, some of these like then third-year players look like some of those linemen on those teams that you referenced. Like, do you feel even better? Or are you like, no, man, like this isn't working? Because that's what I'm hearing out here. And I'm like, whoa, we all need to pump the brakes and have a little bit of a contextual conversation around it. I'm kind of curious where you net out, because it's easy to comp it and be like, what's Dan Lanning doing? Heck, what year one is Kurt Signetti doing? Like, there's a lot of those conversations that I think are happening that I do not believe are comparable.
Well, I think it's a vision thing too, that I think a lot of SC people, SC fans feel like, okay, we don't have a strong offensive line. How do we game plan around it? And that it seems to be this defiance about maybe not running the ball as much when Quentin Joyner and Woody Marks actually look like promising running backs and big play guys for USC, and maybe not leaning on them a little bit more if Miller Moss is going to have no time. That they're looking at game plans, they're looking at the ends of games, whether it's a time thing against Penn State and not utilizing timeouts, whether it's the end of the Maryland game, that they see a pattern, that that USC is losing winnable games. And I can talk about the offensive and defensive lines. You can too. But it's never been easier to build out, I think, a better defensive line with talent. And I think there is this fallacy. And you mentioned, right, bringing in the good offensive lineman. You have Caleb Williams. But there's this idea of almost team washing that, like, oh, we brought in a guy from Texas A&M. We got in a guy from Florida or whatever. And you're like, they didn't play there. And so they're just a guy who didn't play at these big places. And we just assume it's going to work out. Whereas, and I'm just talking about high school, that USC has to have an internal conversation with itself. And this is a different era, right? This is an NIL era. This is, are we in? Do we want to spend like Georgia and Oregon and Ohio State and Alabama and everybody we measure ourselves against, or not? Because if they're not meeting that bar financially, you're going to see more recruiting classes that get torn apart by Oregon and Georgia and whoever. And I understand it's way more expensive to be in LA and to pay coaches to be in LA and to build out giant recruiting staffs in LA. Like, there's a lot that goes into it behind the scenes that makes it more difficult to win at a place like USC. But it's a conversation of, like, are we in or are we out? And when I think USC had, like, I'm going to get this number wrong, but it's in the vicinity. Lincoln Riley signed one blue chip defensive player in his first 2 classes or something. And Dan Lanning signed 13. Right? That when you look at numbers like that, it's not a college football universe in which you can say, this guy's gonna be really good in 3 or 4 years. Just you wait. Because all of these schools are signing Michael Williams and Mateo Uiagalelei, these guys that are contributing positively right away. And USC is like, just wait till Alani Noah is a junior, a redshirt junior or something like that. And you're like, I don't know if that's the universe we live in anymore.
Yeah, it's such a thoughtful conversation to have. Like, I always go back to, like, if year one, if you told me that my blue blood program of choice, whether it be Oregon, SC, Pitt, whatever, it was they came off a down year, made a coaching change, and you said, hey, the first 2 years are going to be tough, but years 3 through 7 are going to be awesome. If we go on, he's going to stay for 7 years as our head coach. I would take that. Yeah. But if, to your point of, like, it's a different era, there's also the era of, like, no, new energy in the program, go get best available. Like, that to me is going to be such a fun dance to watch. I almost think now, if I'm an AD, if I was an athletic director of a school and I had to make a new hire to be a head coach, okay, you've got your A-listers. Let's just say you miss on your first target. My next target, I would literally go down the Kurt Signetti train of, like, who's thriving at a lower tier school that will bring their top 12 players, that will bring 19 players from that league. Like, it's just going to be, it's a really cool dynamic to have that type of dialogue, as we're seeing our first coach just got fired in college football. We're seeing coordinators either get fired or resign. Like, that philosophical choice, I think, is going to be, is more thoughtful than ever before versus give me best available. It's like, what's coming with best available? And then they don't always come. Right? Like, they all didn't go to UW. And I think we all thought they would have. So it's interesting. All right. I want to get you out of here quickly, because I know you got a lot going on. I want to talk about Colorado, because I think we all love, and we're here for the tea on Colorado, but now we're here for, like, quality play from Colorado in a big way. Heisman. Where do you sit on that? Like, I don't even like talking about it till November. We're on the verge of it. Where do you net out in that regard on those two topics?
Has Diego Pavia not already locked it up at Vanderbilt? Is that not a thing yet? Okay.
He would win an award at, like, wherever your old job.
Yeah.
The Heisman.
Okay. So I've seen a lot of really good players this year. There is one player who, to me, in this moment, is the most cartoonishly excellent, and that's Ashton Genty. Now, it's still early. He has the biggest game of his conference slate. Obviously had a couple of enormous runs against Oregon, but that's late night against UNLV on the road. And I wish it were not kicking off at whatever it is, 10:30 Eastern time. He's been the most cartoonishly excellent player this year in terms of both production and how he's looked doing it. So I think that's where I land right now. I mean, you look at the young receivers, you look at Dylan Gabriel, there's a lot to love about this year. But I think, to me, in terms of pure excellence, because we know it's kind of a running back quarterback award right now, That's where I land in this moment.
Yes or no question. Do you think
Yeah.
that the Heisman Award should be pushed a month and be given after the season because of the amount of games that are in this new playoff era?
Ooh, good question. But if Ashton Genty doesn't end up in the playoff because whoever else does ends up as the G5 representative, the unofficial, G5 representative, I don't know how you hold that against his excellence. So
Right.
I don't know. I guess he's a rare case because generally this is given to, an SEC player or a Big Ten player or some kind of power conference player. No, I would do regular season. I would keep it that way just because I think there, as you mentioned before, there's so many variables, right? That a team doesn't end up in the playoff, but they're an 11-2 team, or it's hard to sort of measure the magnitude of excellence. So I'm okay with it. I think I already think the season's going to feel too long. So I like kind of the tentpole stuff in December. I'm good with that tradition. As for Colorado, they can get after the passer. Speaking of teams who have improved up front, Sam Okunlola and BJ Green. I think BJ Green has something like 12 Havoc plays on the season already. The corners are playing well. Even the non-Travis Hunter corners are playing well. Their defense is ahead of their offense, and it's very quiet because they're in a new old conference in the Big 12, and there's no clear measuring stick in that conference in this moment. But I don't know, forget the offense for a second. I think the defensive playmakers there in a flawed conference and on a flawed schedule. And offensively, we're seeing them run a little bit more. I still don't love their line. Shador makes absolutely incredible plays. And some of the teams they've played against this year are just flawed. And they got out of that Baylor game in very fortunate fashion. They destroyed a flawed Arizona team. I don't know. It's a good year to be a quality team in that conference.
Yeah. Can we
which I think they are.
An Oregon, Colorado playoff game.
Oregon, Colorado playoff game. Oregon will rip their arms off limb from limb.
I love it. Okay, I want to play a little game with you because as we started off the top, you are a pizza connoisseur. You've taught me and many others the art of that craft, as well as you educate many of us in college football with your incredible podcast called The Solid Verbal. Go check that out at a variety of different places, including their Patreon. It's amazing. Okay, if these schools were pizzas, what pizza would they be? Okay, we got 5 schools, we got 5 pizzas, and I know you can go everywhere from a topping standpoint. Okay, so we are going number 1. Let's go to the Oregon Ducks.
Okay. Oregon is a supreme pizza this year. They're not extra beefy. It's not deep dish or anything like that. They're not built in the way that old Wisconsin was. But there's a lot of different flavor to this team. So we'll call it like a pepperoni and onion and garlic, maybe some spicy honey, maybe some pineapple there for Dylan Gabriel. They are filled with toppings. They are a more is more pizza this year.
I love it. Okay, let's stay in LA, your backyard.
Yes.
The Trojans coming off a challenging game at Maryland. What kind of pizza are they?
Oh, man. So the Trojans are Chicago Tavern Cut. So it's extra thin. Like the cracker crunch. There's a lot of crunch to them with that speed, but the depth isn't there. The beef isn't there. So they're just like the extra thin, crispy, still fun, still a great snack, but it's not super filling right now.
Coming off their first win in the Big Ten era, Deshaun Foster's UCLA Bruins.
Okay, so they're bagel bites. UCLA, it's a nice story. I just want more, right? They're leaving me wanting more. That Ethan Garbers had a great all-purpose performance on the ground, through the air. You called that game. I have great memories of bagel bites, but it's not something I want for dinner right now. So hopefully UCLA can graduate from bagel bite into a bagel pizza, because we all had after school snacks, those bagel pizzas, but the dough isn't fully formed yet for UCLA, so we're relying on something out of the freezer.
Okay, well, I'm heading out to Indiana for Chris Ignetti's squad. They're facing Washington, and this is college football through the lens of the West Coast. So help out our fans in Bloomington. What is UW in your oven?
Oh, Washington. Okay, something new, inconsistent. I'm gonna go with maybe like a Neapolitan pizza.
Okay.
So it's smaller, right? So the line isn't what it was last year. That was sort of the hidden secret of Washington last year. Such a strong offensive line. I don't know if they won the Joe Moore Award or they were up for the Joe Moore Award. Yeah. So a little bit softer up front, but I like where Jonah Coleman is as a running back this year. So I'm going to say it's more of a knife and fork Washington team than a big substantial one in your hand like Neapolitan pizza can be. So I don't know. It's a classic Washington team. It's not the best Washington team. It's not the worst Washington team in the way that Neapolitan is classic. Washington, I'm not a Neapolitan guy myself. I'm more of a New York pizza guy, but it's respectable.
All right. And then finally, a team that played UW earlier in the season. I believe they're going to San Diego State this coming weekend.
Okay.
And they got a shot in our eyes here if they win out with their only loss to Boise State, who may win their league championship and get a bid, as you referenced, into the CFP as a conference champion. Washington State, your final pizza of the day on the menu.
Ooh, Washington State. So, okay, we're talking about a good running team. Not a lot of opposition thus far this year, but a nice win against Washington. This one's tougher to me. So I'm saying quality pizza, but not necessarily top of the top. I'm going to go with a Long Island grandma slice, okay? It's not your thickest, right? It might not be the one that you choose when you see all the slices in front of you. But every time you get it, you're like, oh, I like this square. There's a little bit of crispiness to it. It feels substantial in the hand. It's not that big New York slice. It's not the Detroit slice. It's not the it's always quality. It's always a nice option. And it's a good story that grandmothers on Long Island created this because they didn't have the hot pizza ovens. So it's sort of something out of nothing. Does that make sense for Washington State? Like, nobody thought that they could perform. The grandmothers on Long Island were like, how are we going to make pizza? And here's Washington State just chugging along, collecting W's.
Collecting W's. Tell you what, you are a great storyteller.
I didn't know we were going to do that. That was pretty good.
That was right off the cuff. I think you should add that to the late night on Saturdays when you guys are a little delirious.
I still need to make you pizza.
Show.
I still need to make you. You got to come through.
I hope hopefully to be back in Chicago in November. Yeah. If so, I'll come in a day early. We'll come hang out. We'll go to Evanston.
Yes.
We'll walk around campus. We'll be warm. We'll have a cup of Joe. We'll make a pizza. We'll talk football.
Yeah.
And I know we'll get you back on this show.
Anytime.
Dan, you're one of my great friends. You've been great counsel for me on many fronts. Of course, around college football, but also life, man. Thank you for the time. Tell that beautiful family of yours hello and enjoy what will be an incredible week 9.
Oh, you too. Thanks as always.
It's the Afterglow. That's right. That was our conversation with Dan Rubenstein, Yogi Roth. Here, Jim Thornby there. That's a line that they say on The Solid Verbal. Check out Dan Rubenstein on The Solid Verbal. As always, our interviews are presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know as you are on the go, go, go. Jim, I got hungry in that conversation. So that was one takeaway. But what takeaways did you have from Dan in that discussion?
Yeah, well, extremely impressed by him being able to do that off the cuff with that. I mean, that is truly a master class in both college football and in pizza. There was some pizza references that I had no idea, but I rolled with it, and I was just like. But then, as I'm thinking back now, I'm like, oh, that's genius. Two, love his backdrop going on right there, especially like somehow, as you can see, like right now, like. Getting not the lights in the glasses, the glare on the glasses, like he's got that down pat somehow. So I gotta figure out how you've done that, and like that's an off-season project for me as we go into the lab. But yeah, I mean, it was just a really smart conversation. I loved his line, "An Oregon human." So like I laughed quite a few times as you guys were doing this. So kudos to Dan.
Yeah, kudos to Dan. I was excited just to have him on. He's become a really close friend over the years, and I think he's really thoughtful. And we pride ourselves on having thoughtful conversation in college football through the lens of the West Coast. I'm heading to the Midwest. I guess it's East Coast because East Coast time zone to Bloomington, Indiana this week, which is really cool because
you know that Indiana has separate time zones inside of Indiana. That's like
that makes sense to me because I was like, what is happening? What time zone am I on? Yeah. Last time we were there, but
they've got different pockets going on there. It's more than we need to explain in this podcast, but just an FYI.
Yeah, I think we'll bring Rhett Lewis on to explain that one next time because he's an Indiana alum. He and Guy Haberman and our crew are going there because they got UW. They're facing Washington. I think what'll be the game of the week, College Game Day is going to be there. The college football world will descend on IU for the second week in a row. Big Noon Kickoff, was there last weekend. Game Day crew there this weekend. Pretty cool for that program. So was my takeaway from Dan. was UW. I think he called them a Neapolitan pizza, which originated in Naples. I've been in Naples. Now, the thing with a pizza in Naples is, like, it's not a slice. It is like a circle. It is a pie, and you don't cut it. You kind of have, if you want like a fork and knife, you can do it, or you can just kind of go crazy right to the face there. But overall, I like it because it was the only vegetarian description I think that he had among all of those teams. So thank you for hooking me up, Dan, in that regard. But overall, I love his insight. He's really well connected, really well sourced, and I think it was fun. I think the USC conversation is one that we'll continue to have based on how they do on Friday night. The heat is cranked up literally here in Southern California, also around that program. It is cooled around UCLA as they got their win. I think he called them bagel bites. We'll see what they do in their bye week, heading into a game that I just found out I'll be calling at Nebraska, UCLA. So we'll be heading back to Lincoln for another sellout. That'll be the 402nd, I think, sellout in program history. So we'll have that number solidified for you.
Yeah, we'll lock it down next week.
Yeah, we'll lock that one down. All right. Thank you for all your support and love, of course, to our founding partner, 76. And wherever you're listening to this, really appreciate YouTube. It keeps growing. Let's keep that going. We're trying to put more content there, more shorts, more short form content, bite-sized conversations, topical conversations. Let us know if there's things that you want. And as always, go to yoption.com. We take a lot of pride in how we are curating that page. Jim, thank you as always for your support, your confidence, and most importantly, your brain and your work, because you are thriving, man. And I much, much appreciate it. So I'm going back to prep for my game, and hopefully all of you are enjoying your week. Lots of love. Peace.